Chapter 15, Section 2, the Spanish and Portuguese colonies in the Americas. How did Spain and Portugal build colonies in the Americas? Things you should be able to do by the end of the section is explain how Spain ruled its empire in the Americas, major features of the Spanish colonial society and culture, and then also how Portugal and other European nations began to challenge Spanish power. So Crash Course History has a nice little Spanish Empire video. If you'd like to watch that, you most certainly may. Ruling the Spanish Empire. So when we look at the Spanish Empire, it's big. I mean, we're talking the southeastern part of the United States, almost all the way down to the tip of South America. So tremendous amount of territory. So they're trying to figure out ways that they're going to be able to do this. So what the Spanish government decides to do is they set up the Council of Indies, which allows them to pass some laws, not all laws, but some laws enough to be able to run things. And then they also create viceroys, so think of them as governors. And they kind of divide up this territory into 2 to 4 different viceroys, and they have a governor who's in charge of both. So one of the things that the government is intent on doing, especially in light of the Protestant Reformation, is attempt to convert Native Americans to Roman Catholicism. And so the church and the government work together to make sure that that's happening. So when we look at how are they ruling, not only are they governing, but they're also trying to impact the religious lives of the people they're ruling over. And another key piece to this, and this would be not just for the Spanish, but for other European countries as they create these colonies as well, this mercantilist system where the mother country ends up making lots and lots of money from it. And so the expectation is that the colonies would send raw materials, gold, silver, fur, lumber, foodstuffs, whatever it might be, to the mother country. The mother country would take some of those raw materials, like for example lumber, and build ships, and then those manufactured goods would come back to the colonies, and the colonies would have to buy exclusively from the mother country. And so that is a real favorable balance of trade when you look at this from the aspect of the mother country, because they get to export an awful lot to the colonies, and they import, very little. What they do import are raw materials, so it's not as expensive. And so sugarcane plantations end up being very profitable for the Spanish Empire because they can take that sugarcane and bring it and turn it into, in most cases, rum, I guess, and then that rum is going to then be sent throughout the world. So the other part of ruling the Spanish Empire, one of the early policies is this encomienda, and the plan of it versus the reality of it are very different, I guess. So ideally, what's going to happen is the Spanish settlers are going to protect and educate and Christianize the Native Americans. And in exchange, the Native Americans are going to work for a brief period of time for the Spanish settlers, or they would pay in tribute and then in payment for being protected and educated and Christianized. The reality of it is that the Spanish used this to force them to work in brutal conditions. And so Native Americans die in large numbers in a combination from disease and just the brutality of it all. And so a Spanish priest eventually speaks out. This Bartolomeu de las Casas pleads with the Spanish king, talking about just how horrible and terrible the conditions are. And so Spain does make some changes. They do pass new laws. The problem is they're too far away. And so it's kind of like when the cat's away, the mice will play. So the Spanish settlers in the Americas do whatever the heck they want anyway. And eventually they're going to create another system that's going to be similar to sharecropping. And it just places Native Americans and African Americans into a real poor situation. Because of this high loss of death, that's why they turn to Africa to fill this labor shortage, especially to work on the sugarcane plantations. So if we look at this cultural blending, so what was colonial society like? It ends up creating this really unique culture of European, Native American, African American, especially some parts of Latin America have a tremendous amount of culture because of those three things coming together. But one of the other probably more important things, at least for down the road, is the social pyramid that gets set up. And those people who were born in the old world, Spain or Portugal, are at the top of this pyramid. Next would be the purebred Spanish and Portuguese that were born in the New World. And then you've got the mestizos and mulattoes, which are mixed races, mixed groups. And then the Indians, the Native Americans, and Africans are at the bottom of this pyramid. And so this structure is going to remain. Eventually what you're going to have is you're going to have the Latin America and South America go through a series of revolutions, late 1700s, early 1800s. And this pyramid remains pretty much the same, except the peninsulars are gone and the Creoles replace. And so it's going to be tough to totally transform the culture. The other part of this is towns play and cities play a very important role. So that's where the cultural centers are. And so the University of Mexico is set up pretty early on. That's where the vast majority of Spanish settlers moved to, is to the cities, not out in the boondocks and the sticks. And there's a big emphasis on education. And that's why the University of Mexico was built. In part, they needed educated priests. And so in order to Christianize Native Americans, they needed more priests. And they wanted to make sure that they were well educated. And then you also get some women who received education in convents. So if we go beyond the Spanish Empire, one of the first countries to really challenge, I guess, Spain is Portugal. And so Portugal gets Brazil. It's on the other side of that line of demarcation. So it is in the region that Portuguese can settle in. And so they use land grants and all those types of things to try and encourage settlers. The big problem with Brazil is they didn't find the mineral wealth, this gold and the silver. So they have to eventually find other things. And one of the most profitable things was this Brazil wood dye. And then eventually they find out that Brazil is pretty good for agriculture. So they start to plant crops and they start to have livestock and they start to export those goods, and agriculture becomes a big money maker. In Brazil, ag is still a pretty big competitor in the world and with the United States in terms of turning out like soybeans and those types of things. And then eventually what's going to happen is more and more European countries are going to be attracted to the Americas. And so South America and Latin America and Middle America are pretty much gobbled up by the Spanish and the Portuguese. So that really leaves North America, the present day east coast of the United States and Canada. And so that's where they focus their energies. Now, the other thing, too, would be the use of smugglers and pirates to be able to kind of circumvent and get around the Spanish and the Portuguese and to be able to tap into that wealth. And so you get this global piracy that takes place on the high seas in this period, especially the English. The English are pretty good at being pirates and stealing some of the Spanish silver and gold and using it to help build up what's going to become the British Navy.